The morning sun had barely lifted when Karen Holloway came storming down Maplewood Lane. Her heels clicked with military precision, and her clipboard of her weapon of choice was clutched like a judge's gavel. My wife, Emily, 7 months pregnant, was in the front yard, gently watering the lavender bushes she had planted just weeks earlier. She looked serene, unaware of the storm about to hit. "Emily Harper." Karen's voice sliced through the air. Neighbors turned to watch. Some peeked from behind curtains. Others pretended to check their mailboxes, unwilling to get caught but too curious to look away. Emily wiped her brow, giving Karen a calm, if puzzled, smile. "Good morning, Karen." Karen didn't bother with pleasantries. She jabbed her clipboard toward the lavender as if it were contraband. "Those plants are not on the HOA-approved flora list. You've been warned twice. This is your third offense." "They're just flowers, Karen," Emily said softly. "They're not bothering anyone." "That's where you're wrong," Karen sneered. "You are willfully undermining community standards. This isn't a hippie commune. It's a residential development with rules, and violators face consequences." I watched from our porch, my fists clenched. Emily had insisted I let her handle it, believing reason would prevail. But Karen wasn't here for a civil discussion. She was here to assert dominance. Karen's tone sharpened, her words slicing with venom. "As HOA President, I am filing an official Class 3 violation complaint. Under the Community Preservation Act, that's grounds for severe punitive measures." Emily's hand instinctively moved to her belly, a silent act of protection. "Punitive measures for lavender." Karen leaned in, lowering her voice but amplifying its malice. "Repeat offenders can be escalated to a disciplinary hearing. In cases of persistent defiance, the HOA board reserves the right to recommend capital sentencing." For a moment, the world seemed to still. "Capital sentencing." Karen had said it so casually, as if discussing a parking ticket. Emily's face remained composed, but I saw her fingers tense around the watering can. I stepped forward, unable to stay silent. "That's absurd, Karen. This is a neighborhood, not a dictatorship." Karen turned to me, her smile razor-thin. "Mr. Harper, perhaps you should familiarize yourself with the community charter you signed. Non-compliance undermines neighborhood integrity. Emily's behavior constitutes a direct threat. The board will act accordingly." She turned on her heel and marched away, leaving behind a trail of tension that seemed to cling to the air long after she was gone. That afternoon, an official notice was nailed to our front door. It wasn't delivered in an envelope or mailed discreetly. No, Karen wanted it to be seen. Bold red letters screamed across the top. "Criminal HOA violation. Subject, Emily Harper offense. Repeated bylaw defiance. Recommended penalty permanent exile." Emily sat at the kitchen table, the notice trembling in her hands. "James, she's escalating this." "I know," I said, pacing the room, "but this isn't just petty harassment anymore. She's crossing legal lines." Emily sighed, her voice heavy with a mix of exhaustion and defiance. "She wants a public execution. Maybe not literally, but symbolically. She wants to ruin us to prove a point." And that's when I realized the full weight of Karen's power play. This wasn't about flowers. It wasn't even about rules. It was about control. Karen had carved out an empire in this HOA, and Emily's quiet defiance was a threat to that empire's illusion of absolute order. But there was something Karen didn't know. While she had her HOA rulebook, I had the federal law on my side. For over a year, I had been working undercover as a federal prosecutor specializing in organized corruption cases. I had seen this pattern before, small-time tyrants hiding behind bureaucratic jargon to mask abuse of power. Karen was no different. She was just bold or foolish enough to escalate it to a death sentence for a pregnant woman. She had no idea who she was up against. As Emily placed the notice on the table, I reached for my phone. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a legal battle waiting to be fought, and I was done waiting. "Karen just declared war," I said, dialing the number that would set the wheels of justice in motion. "She's going to regret it." Outside, the lavender swayed gently in the breeze, a quiet symbol of resistance. Karen Holloway's reach extended far beyond her title of HOA President. She was the self-appointed monarch of Maplewood Lane, ruling through a mixture of manufactured fear and carefully crafted illusions of authority. What began as a petty landscaping dispute had now escalated into an all-out campaign to publicly dismantle my family. The following morning, as Emily and I sat quietly over breakfast, a stack of HOA violation notices landed on our doorstep. Karen's enforcers, riders turned zealots, roamed the neighborhood, pinning citations on mailboxes like scarlet letters. Today, Emily was accused of illegal water usage, unsanctioned decorative rocks, and, absurdly, hosting unregistered wildlife because a butterfly garden had naturally sprung up around her lavender. The list of offenses wasn't just laughable, it was strategic. Karen was burying us in bureaucratic noise, hoping we'd either buckle under the weight or become pariahs in our own community. But every notice she issued was a paper-thin facade, waiting to be ripped apart by the right legal hands. What Karen didn't know was that those hands were mine. I spent the next 2 days combing through the HOA's governing documents, dissecting every clause, every footnote. It was a mess of amateur legalese full of contradictions, overreaches, and illegal amendments. Karen had manipulated the HOA bylaws into a private arsenal, creating emergency powers that allowed her to escalate minor violations into criminal complaints. But none of it had actual legal standing. And yet, it was working. People were afraid. They watched Emily from across the street like she was a felon. Our once friendly neighbors, people we had shared barbecues and baby shower plans with, were now too afraid to even wave. Karen's smear campaign had found fertile ground. That afternoon, I confronted one of the HOA board members, David Langley, an aging accountant who had once been reasonable. We met in the local park, away from Karen's ever-watchful eyes. "She's out of control." "David," I said, showing him copies of the fabricated citations, "you know these violations aren't legitimate." David sighed, his face a map of exhaustion. "You think I don't see it? But Karen, she has the board under her thumb. She controls the association's legal fund. Anyone who speaks out gets buried in lawsuits or slapped with code violations until they cave in or move out. She's not untouchable," I said, my tone flat, deliberate. David looked at me, curious. "What are you planning?" I didn't answer. Not yet. The next morning, Karen took her offensive to new heights. She called for an emergency HOA tribunal, an unofficial hearing designed to publicly humiliate Emily. Flyers were plastered across the neighborhood. Community standards emergency, the Harper case. The audacity was staggering. Karen was attempting to stage a mock trial to parade Emily as an example of defiant homeowners. She had even roped in a retired small claims judge, a golf buddy, to preside over this farce. It was clear Karen wanted more than compliance. She wanted submission. Emily, however, stood firm. "Let her have her circus," she said, her eyes fierce, "but make sure the cameras are rolling when it backfires." And so, we prepared. While Karen busied herself choreographing her tribunal, I was busy drafting a formal complaint to the district attorney's office, citing HOA abuse of power, fraudulent enforcement actions, and civil rights violations. I compiled every piece of evidence: Karen's fake citations, her defamatory flyers, video footage of her public threats. But that wasn't enough. Karen had built her empire on fear. To dismantle it, I needed to expose her where she felt in front of her loyal audience. On the morning of the tribunal, Karen transformed the HOA clubhouse into her courtroom. Folding chairs formed rows facing a makeshift podium, where Karen stood in a tailored blazer, clutching her clipboard like a judge's scepter. Neighbors filed in, whispering nervously. The retired judge sat nearby, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to defy Karen's orchestrated charade. Emily entered, head held high, every step radiating defiance. I stood at the back, unseen by most, phone in hand, live streaming every second. Karen banged her gavel on the podium, her voice rising. "We are here to address the gross violations committed by Emily Harper, an individual whose repeated defiance threatens the very fabric of our community." Theatrics, empty, hollow theatrics. But as Karen's tirade reached a crescendo, I sent a notification ping to every phone in the room, a live notification. "Breaking: HOA under federal investigation for abuse of power." Details streaming now. Heads turned. Phones lit up. Karen's voice faltered. She didn't know it yet, but her empire had just begun to crumble. Karen Holloway's grip on the neighborhood had always rested on one fragile foundation: perception. She didn't command through law or legitimacy. She ruled through the illusion of power, the belief that no one could or would stand against. Her bed illusions shatter fast when exposed to truth. As the phones buzzed and screens lit up with the breaking news of a federal investigation into the HOA, the room transformed. What had started as Karen's stage for public execution had become a courtroom of her own undoing. "Turn those off," Karen shrieked, slamming her clipboard onto the podium. "This is an official HOA tribunal. You will not disrupt these proceedings with false information." But it was too late. Neighbors who had once cowered under her stare were now reading headlines aloud. "Federal probe into Maplewood HOA abuse." Karen Holloway named as primary suspect. "Fraudulent violations and civil rights violations under investigation." Karen's face drained of color, but she wasn't done fighting. "Not yet. This is slander. Lies spread by people who hate community order." She spat, glaring at Emily. "You think your husband's little internet stunt will save you? The HOA's authority is absolute within these gates." That was her fatal misstep. I stepped forward, walking calmly toward the podium, holding up a single sheet of paper. "Karen Holloway," I said, my voice steady, "this is a formal cease and desist order from the county prosecutor's office. You are hereby ordered to immediately suspend all enforcement activities pending the outcome of the federal investigation." The silence in the room was suffocating. Karen's lips quivered, her eyes darting toward the board members for support. But none of them moved. They were no longer board members. They were spectators, watching their queen's crown crumble. Emily joined me at the front, her posture unflinching. "This tribunal is over, Karen. It never had any legal standing. You've terrorized this community long enough. Karen's mask of composure cracked. I am the law here. The HOA gives me authority. No, Karen, I interrupted, my tone colder now. The HOA is a civil body with limited regulatory oversight. You've twisted it into a personal weapon that ends today. David Langley, the once timid board member, stood up. His voice, though quiet, cut through the tension. Karen, I think you should step down. It was as if a dam had burst. One by one, neighbors who had sat silently began murmuring their agreement. A chorus of quiet defiance rose, gaining strength with every voice. The crowd that had once been Karen's shield was now her jury. Karen's composure shattered entirely. You're all ungrateful. I built this community. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart, but her words no longer held weight. The spell was broken. As the tension reached its peak, the clubhouse doors swung open, and two men in suits entered. U.S. Marshals. Their presence was deliberate, timed to perfection. Karen, Holloway, one asked, holding up his badge. We have a federal summons for you to appear before a grand jury regarding charges of racketeering, fraud, and civil rights violations. Karen's shriek of protest echoed off the clubhouse walls, but no one moved to support her. The HOA board sat frozen, faces pale, unwilling to share her fate. As the marshals approached, Karen backed into the podium, still clutching her clipboard like a life preserver. This is harassment. You have no jurisdiction here. The lead marshal's reply was simple and final. Ma'am, the law doesn't stop at HOA gates. The image of Karen Holloway, self-proclaimed Queen of Maplewood Lane, being escorted out in handcuffs was a sight no neighbor would ever forget. Her protests faded into a pathetic mutter as the doors closed behind her. For a long moment, the room remained still. The aura of fear Karen had built over years had evaporated in mere minutes. Emily turned to the crowd, her voice calm but resolute. This community belongs to its people, not a dictator hiding behind bylaws. It's time we take it back. The applause started with a few hesitant claps, but quickly swelled into a standing ovation. Not for us, but for the reclaiming of their dignity, stolen piece by Karen's reign. As people gathered around, offering apologies and pledges of support, I felt Emily's hand slip into mine. This isn't over, she whispered, her smile tinged with both relief and determination. But it's the beginning of the end. She was right. Karen might be gone, but her corruption had left deep scars. The real cleanup was only beginning. But for the first time, the neighborhood had chosen to stand. Karen Holloway's arrest wasn't the end. It was the spark that lit the fire. In the days that followed, the facade of the Maplewood Lane HOA collapsed like a decaying house of cards. Federal auditors, backed by county investigators, swept through the HOA offices. What they uncovered was worse than even I had anticipated. Falsified financial reports, inflated vendor contracts funneling funds into Karen's personal accounts, and a laundry list of civil rights violations disguised as community enforcement actions. Every HOA fine, every ridiculous code violation was now evidence. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt awake. Residents who had lived in fear of Karen's clipboard army began to come forward, their stories pouring out like a dam had burst. Elderly couples fined thousands for painting their shutters a non-compliant shade of beige. A single mother threatened with foreclosure over a misplaced recycling bin. Veterans publicly shamed for flying flags deemed too large. Each story was another nail in Karen's coffin. Emily became the face of the resistance. Her calm dignity throughout the ordeal had earned her a quiet reverence among the neighbors. She organized town hall meetings, not HOA meetings, but real community gatherings where people could speak freely, unshackled from fear. David Langley, once Karen's timid accountant, now stood at Emily's side, determined to make amends. We let her control us for too long, he admitted during one meeting, his voice tinged with guilt. But this is our chance to rebuild the right way. As for Karen, her trial became a statewide spectacle. The woman who once paraded herself as the guardian of suburban perfection now faced charges of racketeering, fraud, impersonating a judicial authority, and civil rights violations. During the court proceedings, Karen tried to spin her usual narrative, portraying herself as a misunderstood protector of community values, but the evidence was overwhelming. Hundreds of pages of fraudulent citations, financial records exposing embezzlement, and video footage of her staging the illegal tribunal were presented before the jury. But perhaps the most damning moment came when Emily took the stand. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She spoke of the day Karen had stood on our lawn and threatened exile over lavender bushes. She described the fear of being ostracized while carrying our unborn child, and the calculated cruelty Karen had wielded under the guise of community standards. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Karen's smug facade had crumbled into a mask of bitter regret. The jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. Karen was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison the same week Karen was taken away in shackles. Emily gave birth to our daughter. We named her Hope because after years of Karen's reign, that's what had returned to Maplewood Lane. But rebuilding wasn't just symbolic. The HOA board was dissolved, its charter revoked. In its place, the community voted to establish a neighborhood council transparent, accountable, and powerless to inflict arbitrary punishments. Neighbors, once strangers divided by fear, now collaborated on decisions, from landscaping guidelines to community events. The lavender bushes, they became a symbol of quiet defiance. Emily's garden flourished, not because of HOA approval, but because the community chose beauty over bureaucracy. It wasn't uncommon to see children playing among the flowers, their laughter a soundtrack to a neighborhood that had reclaimed its soul. One afternoon, as I stood on the porch watching Emily cradle hope under the shade of the now famous lavender, David joined me, He said, "I used to think rules were what held a community together, but now I realize it's people. Honest people, willing to stand up when it matters." I nodded, watching Emily's serene smile as she rocked our daughter. Karen underestimated that. She thought fear was stronger than unity. "She learned the hard way," David said, a grin breaking through. "Too bad she's got 2 decades to think it over." But I knew the story wasn't over. Maplewood Lane's battle had been won, but across the state, hundreds of communities still suffered under their own Karen's power-hungry tyrants masquerading as neighborhood leaders. And if this fight had taught me anything, it was that exposure is the ultimate weapon against manufactured power. As the sun set over the street, painting the houses in hues of gold and lavender, Emily turned to me, eyes glinting with that familiar fire. "What's next?" she asked, already knowing the answer. I smiled. "We help the next neighborhood take their Karen down.